Columbus. Okay, well. So yeah, we had like a 2-week break, I guess. Considering the first week was Father's Day, and then last week you got held up getting a new stroller.
Yeah, I-70. The bridge was out in over by Stapleton, and then it took us double to triple the length of time that it should have.
Gotcha. No.
Yeah, right.
Shit happens. No worries.
Yeah.
But how you feeling? You feeling good?
Yeah. Feeling pretty good.
That's good.
How has things been in Ohio?
Things in Ohio. Well, Christopher Columbus was taken down from the state capitol.
I saw that. They're also lobbying to change the name of the city, right?
That, yeah. I mean, I don't know how successful that will be. I don't know what the alternative names are, but I guess for me, what I like looking at and observing is people outraged over Christopher Columbus and their concerns about the erasure of history, which is ironic for me because if you knew anything about the history of Christopher Columbus, you would probably understand it's a little bit offensive that he even has a statue to begin with.
Yeah. So. He was a genocidal maniac and a slaver.
I remember, I don't know, I think it was a couple years back. I was arguing with some guy on Facebook, and he held this new narrative that, in defense of Columbus, that he wasn't as bad as people think. He was basically set up, though.
Have you seen Knowing Better versus Bad Empanadas?
I saw that video, yeah. Well, I remember watching Knowing Better's first deal in defense of Columbus, and he basically explained his viewpoints within that narrative I was talking about earlier, that Columbus was set up, basically, to take the fall for a lot of things. Yeah. Bad Empanada's response was perfect, though. It forced Knowing Better to reevaluate his position and make a separate video explaining okay, listen, I was taken out of context, which I'll give him benefit of the doubt for, because I like Knowing Better. I feel like he's willing to admit if he's made mistakes and stuff. In fact, I actually recently watched his video on it was supposed to be the Third Amendment, but also had to do with the state, how the police became how they are today in terms of their militarization and the war on drugs and stuff like that. So, and he's arguing from this perspective because he's an Army veteran, and he makes a good point where listen, if we were in the military and we did half the shit that these police were caught doing, we not only would we be thrown out and discharged from the military, we'd be in jail. Because there's no soldiers union protecting bad cops. There's no, for me, there's much more training involved in terms of how they deal with situations that cops typically deal with. The police are basically trained as an urban military now, as an occupying force. And he explains it pretty well, so I'll give him credit for that.
He says that, but I'm going to call malarkey. And here's why.
Okay. Oh, okay.
How many CIA black sites? How many waterboarding procedures? How many situations go on where you could technically consider a genocide being taken on behalf of the United States government? Quite a few. Okay. Quite a few. Now, that's the picture that they want to paint to make the military seem like they're held to a higher standard. But right now, they're not reporting civilian casualties, nor are they having to do anything associated with the private military contractors. They don't have to report that at all.
Okay, so I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I believe the context he was arguing from, when he was a convoy protector in Iraq, he's arguing it from that perspective, not as a CIA operative running a black site, obviously, because we could talk about the human rights abuses involved in those places. Of course, I think they would put any police brutality to shame. He's arguing from the perspective of just a grunt soldier in Baghdad. Now of course we can talk about like atrocities. I'm not trying to excuse atrocities committed by the United States military, because obviously the Iraq War and Afghanistan show that there were plenty amounts of that happening, whether that was Abu Ghraib or even a couple of noted massacres that took place in both those countries, conducted by U.S. soldiers. But I guess the point that he was trying to make, that there's a lot of cops that want to play soldier when their focus should be being police officers, and they want all the thanks and prestige that comes with being a soldier without any of the responsibility taken for it. So I guess that's the perspective that he was arguing on in his last video. That's what I took from it. So
yeah, my analysis comes to like a lot of the people inside the military. We have to consider that they're institutionalized within that system, right?
Right.
Not only that, but the fact that you've taken away conscription at the moment. You're looking at 1% of the population being able and willing, right? Is kind of the recruiter's slogan.
Right.
So, I mean, when you look at both those things, the societal expectation as well as kind of the standpoint of that individual psyche is already primed to move into the military. And then after that, you're institutionalized to a point where you're going to see that the military can do very little wrong unless you look at just objective, terrible things. And I mean, I'm saying that, you know, in a similar aspect to Abu Ghraib or Zimbardo's work on the Lucifer effect, or kind of the role assumption and how it changes your psyche, I'm going to say that it definitely shifts a person's ability to be able to look at that. And I mean, perspective defines reality. So even if you look at the same thing, it's going to be radically different than somebody that's a human rights advocate. Because, you know, I'd hate to say it, but if you're going into the military, the chances of you being a human rights advocate are very low.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the consequence of like what happens when we have an all volunteer force. Not only do we have like a disconnect to what just the apathy that the general public has in terms of military interventions across the world, because I guess there's less vested interest, I would say, because, you know, you're joining on your own volition. You're not being, you know, drafted in a sense like it was in Vietnam.
Yeah. The United States has also done a miraculous job at doing and readying soldiers to basically, during the institutionalization process, to have them be ready for combat and to really craft the mentality that's required in those situations. And I mean, we can see the various whistleblowers and how they get treated. So, I mean, how many people are put into situations where it is just unacceptable to have themselves speak out against it? I'm going to say, you know, from people that I have talked to, they'll say about 50% at the best of people that go through the proper channels are met with justice from what they have seen. And I talked to a lot of military folks, but, you know,
going to who was it that was recently just acquitted by Trump for essentially
war crimes?
I'm trying to remember the context, like what exactly, like he killed a Taliban fighter, and I think it's what he did after that, which was considered a war crime. I can't remember exactly what it was about. whether it's how he killed them or I don't remember, but you know the guy that I'm talking about, right?
First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence and Major Matthew Goldstein.
Yeah. I know it was in Afghanistan.
Yeah. They reinstated his, they pardoned and then reinstated the Green Beret and then the SEAL team rank so that they weren't, so
what was the crime though that what they were charged for?
So in 2013, Lawrence was accused of illegally ordering a fatal shooting of 2 men on motorcycle while patrolling Afghanistan's Kandahar province. He was found guilty with 2 counts of murder.
Gotcha. Okay. There is like a huge sort of like, I guess for a lot of Americans here to just basically like, well, it's Taliban, they're terrorists, so why should we care? Why should we, it's like this, they approach it with like this, well, let's just take the gloves off. I mean, they're the enemy. But, this is why I think it really needs to be emphasized that we need to be held to a higher standard with regard, especially with adhering to like war rules and international law. Geneva Convention protocol here.
Let's put it this way, right? They're still people, not justifying any of the things that they have done. Right. But the United States, I mean, you look at Rambo and they're all about the Mujahideen fighters, right?
Right.
Man, that aged poorly.
Well, I think they actually edit because, at the end of the video, like they were like, this video is dedicated to all the brave fighters, Mujahideen of Afghanistan. I think after 9/11, they had to like change the words in that just a little bit to just mentioning just the brave fighters of Afghanistan.
Yeah. So let's say that we overthrew their democratic government, right? And then after that, we looked for the religious extremist rebels, which were the Mujahideen, which we funded and trained. And Russia came in to, try to back it up, going back to, socialism. And then the United States continued to create that element. And then lo and behold, the religious extremists were propelling the Wahhabism onto a global stage. And Wahhabism, if you're not familiar, is from Saudi Arabia, and is the primary ideology.
Extreme form of Islam, yeah.
Yeah. And lo and behold, the Taliban ran the state, so they technically became state actors. We then have been basically negotiating them ever since. And we just treat every single negotiation with them as, now we do what we want. And then we're over there to basically do a neo-colonial experiment. And I mean, that's what it is.
I'm glad we're talking about Afghanistan because I think Afghanistan represents like a perfect model that I see with not just what's happening now with America, but in history in general, that great powers tend to create their own enemies. I'm
not even going to say that. I mean, the United States specifically, in their attempt to create a global hegemonic order.
It's an empire.
I mean, it's just
it's the concepts that we use are just 21st century jargon to describe imperialism and empire. Like that's basically it.
It's just cheaper to have a favorable dictator than it is to have occupying forces, and lo and behold, that's what we're doing now.
I guess the point I wanted to make was that, like, because when I look at ancient Rome, I use the Roman Parthian rivalry as an example.
Sure.
So the Parthian Empire existed between like 200 BC and roughly 280, and they were an empire that obviously occupied Iran, Iraq, the Middle East, that area. They were on Rome's eastern border, and Rome had a very nasty habit of just able to just constantly invade throughout the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and pillage their lands just for revenue. But a consequence to that was it made the Parthian Empire weak, and it was replaced by a more Iranian-based Sassanid empire, which was much more unified, and that empire became like a huge problem for Rome in the later centuries, in like the 3rd and 4th and 5th centuries. So just like Rome, America has a nasty habit of creating their own worst enemies. And I look at Afghanistan as the fact that, yes, the Mujahideen were allies against the Soviets, but once it was no longer versatile to supply the Mujahideen against the Soviets after the Soviet Union fell, we were left with this problem of a failed state in the Middle East where terrorism would grow. And then basically these Mujahideen targeted the United States as the new threat now, especially when Osama bin Laden occupied the area.
Sure. I think, you could say that the United States has basically triggered a new dark ages within the Middle East. Within the last, let's call it 100 years, right? We could probably go back and say, well,
I want to stop you right there because I don't feel like it's solely an American issue. A lot of the problems in the Middle East can just be traced also to colonialism with European powers, especially in how the borders of Syria and Iraq were drawn. And we saw that we saw that issue with just arbitrary borders separating ethnic and religious lines, which led to the creation of ISIS. But yeah, I would say problems in the Middle East, a lot of it can be traced to not only U.S. interventionism, but also because of its colonial past, especially in the Levant.
Yeah, the reason I go back to the past 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Is I want to go back to the Ottoman Empire.
Right. Okay. So we're doing end of World War I when they were defeated. It was pretty much carved up, and territories that were once occupied by the Ottomans were mandates of the British and French, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I would then go further and say we then looked at the regime change that was forced by the United States in Iran, right?
Yes. Okay.
You're looking at a similar thing within Iraq.
Another deal with how America creates its own enemies, because to put things in context, I think it was 1954, 50. It was in the 50s. The Iranians had a political election. They elected, I believe he was left wing. The United States didn't like that, so in a CIA-backed coup, they overthrew him and reinstalled the Shah. Now the Shah lasted for another 20 years until 78, 79. He was overthrown by the Ayatollah, and that's why we have the modern problems with Iran today, because of that fucking issue. So another example of how the United States is responsible for creating their own worst enemies. It's the whole blowback principle, basically. Personified perfectly in that one. But yeah, go on, I'm sorry.
So I mean, there's basically a consistency throughout the United States, historically, be it in Latin America or in the Middle East, 2 points of geopolitical interest for the United States, simply because of resource accumulation within just naturally, right? You can't
it was for the oil.
Well, and lithium, dude.
Yeah.
I mean,
you said lithium?
Yeah. So Afghanistan.
Afghanistan has lithium.
Yeah.
I know. In the most this is not for people listening. This is not history, because this is still happening today. Because in regards to lithium, this is why there was an overthrow in Bolivia, and the left-wing politician was removed and replaced by a minority fascist. conservative, like religious fascists, basically in Bolivia. It was because of lithium interests.
Yeah. Quote unquote for the New York Times, right? June 14th, 2010. Mm-hmm. You can see this, published another way. U.S. identifies vast mineral riches in Afghanistan, and that Afghanistan could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium.
Really? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, if we're looking at it like we're chill with Saudi Arabia simply because even though they create the religious extremism that is fundamentally against the United States,
it's just good business.
It's good business because it's very easy to have OPEC to be able to do that, right? And they don't want a Sunni corridor for oil, and that's directly in opposition to the United States and Saudi Arabia's geopolitical interests. Because if you had Iran, Syria...
I was going to say the alternative is Iran. They're the second largest oil producer, I think. So
yeah, so if you go Russia, Syria, or Iran, Syria, and then you're able to drive it to Iraq, then you're basically able to get a massive amount of oil reserves to the Mediterranean, right?
Correct.
So that would dramatically disrupt the OPEC's ability to control oil prices. I mean, you even saw it this year when the oil prices dropped because Saudi Arabia goes, I want to hurt Russia. Yeah. Right? Like that was a huge component to it.
Well, I mean, getting back to Afghanistan, because I remember you showed me that video by Empire Files about Afghanistan War Exposed, Imperial Conspiracy.
Yeah,
I mean, it really contextualizes why, we have been there for the past 20 years. We've been, to everybody watching, remember, we're still in Afghanistan, and we've been there since 2001. I was in 7th grade. I'm going to be 32 this year. So, I mean, this occupation is the longest United States occupation ever. And what is the end goal? Like, are we staying there forever? Or we have basically become the problem that the Soviets faced like 30 years ago?
I am going to say that we are going to attempt to maintain our control over that region for mineral extraction. That's my base instinct. I don't think that Afghanistan is going to become another United States territory.
No.
But I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I'm gonna say, this is a problem of why we have like an all volunteer force. Is that, do you agree with me that like I think just the general public just doesn't give a shit that we're in Afghanistan anymore?
They don't give a shit.
They just don't care. Like,
or it's on the back burner, right?
Pretty much, yeah. There might be some news, but it's just, I think people just kind of accept it. Like, I guess this is the way things are, I suppose.
Well, here's the other thing, right? Like there's double speak that's going on. It's Trump wanting to pull people out, right? That's one of the big things. Oh, but that's actually not the case. I don't want to pull people out. I want to, do X, Y, and Z. For instance, my big argument to display this would be that he's increased the amount of people in the Middle East tremendously. I mean, look at the military budget being increased.
Yeah.
And you have hawkish conservatives and neocons pushing the idea that this is a good decision. They want this to happen. And,
yeah,
is that the situation? I'm going to say, for the current administration's geopolitical interests, the answer would be yes. That they want that to happen because they're going to be able to continue to extract those military resources. and they can employ the people of Afghanistan, those that want the job. They'll have taxpayer-supported security and private military contractors in order to allow mining operations. So you're not putting Americans at risk during the mining operations. And as long as they keep the casualties low enough and they don't report civilian casualties, no one's really going to care, which is terrible to say.
I mean, I agree with that, but I also agree, like, I think so many administrations don't want to pull out of Iraq because they don't want to be the ones to basically admit defeat. It's Vietnam syndrome all over again, because basically we stayed so long in Vietnam because like we invested so much, and that just snowballs into a continual occupation with no end in sight. And Afghanistan in many ways is our version's Vietnam.
But they are much smarter because...
Well, the things have changed again because, again, people were like protesting against the war because there was a draft. So if me and you lived back in 1966 or 67, there was a vested interest to be like speaking out against the war because we could be drafted. We could be sent there.
Oh, yeah, that no longer exists.
Yeah.
That no longer exists.
And again, like, asking, you know, the average American, like, why are we in Iraq? Why do you think we're still? I'm sorry, not why we're in Iraq. Why? I mean, we're going to be in Iraq forever too. That's just that's a whole separate other topic. But like asking people, why are we still in Afghanistan? Like, Osama bin Laden was killed almost 10 years ago, and that was the reason why we went there to begin with. I guess it's this notion of, again, it goes back to like we invested so much into this government, despite the fact that it's corrupt and only occupies the cities and that it pretty much has no control of the countryside. Like, how long can we keep doing this?
Then I think the only thing that would stop the merry-go-round of occupation and would even have a chance of disrupting it, because Biden's not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, talking about it, let's just say if Joe Biden does win the presidency, we're still going to see like intervention in Afghanistan. We're going to see still intervention in Venezuela. We're still going to see American imperialism like that. I am not certain is going to change.
Yeah,
Again, like I'm just speaking the truth here because like I know like people are not so enthusiastic about Biden. I'm not either. I'm still voting for the guy because I want Trump out.
Yeah,
that's just me.
When you're between a rock and a hard place, I mean, there's really no decision to be made, which sucks to say.
Well, let's switch it to voting, because there's a lot of Facebook groups I follow, and there are just people that cannot bring themselves to voting for Joe Biden. I've seen people pushing Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate, and I've even seen progressives so desperate they're now pushing for Jo Jorgensen, whatever her name is, the Libertarian candidate.
Yeah.
Oh God, the desperation. And all right, I want to talk about the merits of electoral voting. I've been holding this back for a while, but this is just my view, and you can anybody can chew me out for whatever, but I'm just going to say this. Your voting has less to do about what makes you feel good and more about what is better for people besides yourself. So put it in perspective. Go on.
It's not an if and, right? It's not a either or. You can do both, and
Sure.
It takes so little effort. And the problem is, like, they wouldn't be trying to suppress the vote if it didn't mean anything.
Yeah, true.
Right. And again, we wanted Bernie Sanders to win, and now everyone's got, buyer's remorse because they didn't show up to the ballot box, and they didn't, we still had record low turnout. And given. There was some voter suppression, but the bigger thing is you're just not having people get up off their butt and making it a reality. And if you're going to go, oh well, we're going to, you want a revolution, you can't even get up and vote. Okay, like you sound like an idiot. You sound like an immature child that is unable to even have a small commitment, but you want to pretend that everyone's willing to go to these extremes. No, it's stupid.
Well, I guess what aggravates me is all these people that were pushing for Bernie now all of a sudden want to switch their allegiance to like the Green Party candidate. And I tell them like, I don't agree with this, but we live in a two-party system. Yeah. And the Green Party ain't going to fucking win. They keep like having this faith like, oh, they only need a certain amount of percent. And then they'll be on the national poll everywhere. And like they never reach to it. Like again, okay, cool. There may be a chance that they succeed this year. I'm not holding my breath so much. But these people
choice voting and without like in the presence of extreme gerrymandering and the entrenchment of the two-party system, because there is a plurality, there is no way for a third party to win right now, unless there is ranked choice voting.
Well, we always pick the worst time to complain and try and change the system because it's always in the middle of an election. That's the worst time to do it. I agree. There needs to be change. There needs to be. I would love ranked choice voting. I think that would be great. The trouble is,
how are you going to get ranked choice voting?
Well, doesn't Maine have a ranked choice voting system?
Yeah, but where I'm going with this is you have to get to there and remove, like, as much as it sounds, partisan. The Republicans are basically have a very small subsect of voters, right? They have a very small subsect of voters, but because they can mobilize those voters to 26% in a strategically mapped out area, they're going to win. They're going to win, especially with things like the Senate being so anti-democratic. So on the other hand, you have the Democrats, which have to have a massive voter base where they need to try to capture everyone. And people are asking, oh, why doesn't Biden have a freaking platform? Well, it's because he can't open up his mouth without changing too much because he needs everyone underneath.
Pretty much.
You basically have the gun rights advocates and the racists and the people with distinct capital interests and hawks in the Republican Party, right? That's who you have. Everyone else has to fit underneath the Democratic tent, and that's it.
Well, there's this notion where, like, again, like, a lot of people feel like voting is about making themselves feel good. That's why they look at what you're talking about and they go, well, fuck that. I'm going to go for a different candidate. I'm going to vote for Joe or I'm going to vote for Hawkins, despite the fact that they never win. They never win. Folks, they never fucking win. And I understand, like, well, if more people voted for them, then they had a chance. I'm like, well, that's faulty logic. I could argue, like, well, if everybody agreed more with me, Bernie would be the candidate right now. That's just not the reality we live in.
Here's the thing that people also don't understand is group psychology, and they should just read the freaking originating book on it, which is Propaganda by Edward Bernays. And if they understood group psychology and marketing, along with looking at like psychology elements to it and behavioral economics that Richard Thaler has been so involved in, you should just go, okay, we need to understand that people will only accept, it's the minimal acceptable difference. It's the MAD principle, right? And you have to sell that. Unfortunately, Bernie was too different for most people. And even though Joe can't freaking mobilize a base to save it, everyone hates Trump. So it doesn't matter, right? Like people have signs that say any functioning adult.
I will say the people that are like, I ain't voting for Joe, I'm voting third party, I think are just a very vocal minority. I believe this 2020 election is pretty much a referendum on Trump. I guess it doesn't matter who the other major candidate is. People just want somebody to vote against Trump with. I mean, that was what the primary was in general. It was pretty low propensity. Just basically a lot of Dem voters were like, I don't fucking care who the candidate was. Just fucking pick somebody. I want to vote against Trump.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, why are we voting for Biden?
I will say it's not because I fucking love Joe Biden. It's because I want Trump gone. And a lot of people are like trying to argue, well, that's not a legitimate excuse. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
You're basically,
if you want to stop what's happening right now, you choose a different alternative. Yeah. And I don't want to hear this bullshit. I can't stress this enough. Again, I really don't have much love for Joe Biden, but don't you fucking dare tell me this stupid comment, well, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are one and the same, there's no difference. Fuck you. There is a difference.
Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch.
Okay, so not only is the fact that, you know, had Biden been president right now, this pandemic probably most likely would have been handled in a much better way because he has experience with Obama during Ebola. He wouldn't have gotten rid of the pandemic task force like Trump did. He wouldn't have ignored the intelligence community's information about the coronavirus. He wouldn't have done any of that. He wouldn't claim the virus was a hoax. He probably would have had the what is it? The National Authorization Act for businesses to start, you know, producing ventilators. He probably would have had no hesitation doing that. Well, he wouldn't have wasted 2 months in preparation. That alone is enough to indicate for me, like, yes, despite Biden's shortcomings, he still would be a better president than Trump.
Here's something that I will, you know, argue for as well, is that his handlers are better.
Yeah. Okay. You're not. I want to stress this. You're not voting for the person. You're voting for the apparatus that he's going to bring. Because it's not going to be Joe Biden doing everything. He's going to appoint people that are going to run the economy. They're going to run the Department of Agriculture. They're going to run the Justice Department. He's going to appoint these different people. And if we see how Trump picks people, it's abysmal.
If you want to get, here's the next thing that I don't think that people really conceptualize too, is that Ted Cruz is using the language to identify people. Antifa and left-wing activists are one and the same. Yeah. And we have facial recognition software going in and being utilized by police departments to identify anti-police protesters, right?
Right.
And they're coming to their home and being arrested. And if you then add into the fact that if they're using the words left-wing activists and Antifa interchangeably, all of a sudden that means that anybody that Trump doesn't like is Antifa. That also means that all of a sudden you or anybody else that is, I don't know, left of Trump, let's say.
Yeah.
Which is a huge portion of the population.
I was going to say it's a big margin.
Could be identified as a terrorist. And all of a sudden, your Bill of Rights is gone. And there's a reason why you had the knee-jerk reaction from the top brass in the military saying that Trump is a threat to the Constitution. Big things. So if you want to pretend that it's going to be okay afterwards, or, you know, you can just look at it and be identified as a terrorist. And it's you can have your constitutional rights stripped away. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I don't think she's going to last.
I was going to say, if you want another reason, is you cannot have another 4 years of Donald Trump picking these, not only Supreme Court judges, but circuit judges for our court system. And having Mitch McConnell just push them through. This has got to stop. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 87 years old. Do you really think she's going to wait another 4 years? No, she's going to have to step down. Who else? The black guy. What's the name of the black? Clarence Thomas. He's also getting up there. So with the Joe Biden presidency, you have the potential to at least replace 2 judges and help swing the court. Because right now we have a 5-4 conservative leaning Supreme Court.
And to say that Kennedy is the swing vote, I mean, come on.
Wait, Kennedy's still in the... No, I thought he was replaced by Kavanaugh.
I thought Kennedy...
Is there another Kennedy? Because I knew Kennedy stepped down, but I thought his replacement was Kavanaugh. So we got Justice Alito, Clarence Thomas, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Oh my God, John Roberts.
I'm sorry, Roberts. Thank you.
Kavanaugh.
If Roberts is the swing vote,
Sotomayor.
Yeah, that should tell you something, because it's not like he's even center right. He's right wing. It's just that right now the Overton window in American politics has been pushed so far to the right.
Yes.
That, it just seems like he's a centrist or a swing vote.
Again, that alone should be for you to vote Joe, because like he will at least stop these appointments of right-wing judges. I'm not claiming Joe Biden's going to pick the left-wing judge, but let's say like his choice would be like a Merrick Garland, the justice that was refused by Mitch McConnell in 2016 to replace, oh God, what is his name? Fuck, I can't remember any of these justices' names.
Well, so
Scalia, sorry.
Scalia, yeah. I mean, here's the easiest thing that I would say to conceptualize is basically you have a bunch of left-wing internet edgelords that are entirely ineffective at mobilizing, and they're just infighting.
Well, they want to be contrarian.
Yeah, you're an ineffective internet edgelord. That is all you are. And
you're popular on the social media, but in terms of like actually initiating change,
how popular are they actually?
Well, I mean, they're popular within those groups in terms of like feeding the mob what they want to hear.
Until they're out there, they talk big about revolution and everything. Start some unions, right? Fight for workers' rights. Go for those things. And if not, I mean, it's get off your high horse.
Join something at least. Join your local DSA chapter at least.
Yeah, but then, oh my God, the Dem socks, they're terrible. I'm sorry, you want to be a Marxist-Leninist.
Yeah, I guess my problem was with trying to like understand these people and their positions because I guess I'm a little bit too much of a political pragmatist. I mean, yeah, I have Marxist viewpoints, but like I also understand the current reality that we live in. So I guess that kind of limits me from being so much of an idealist. Yeah.
You just again, just until they can actually mobilize something, I really don't want to hear their contrarian bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, okay, if you don't want to vote for Joe Biden, fine, don't vote for Joe Biden. I'm not going to fucking twist your arm, like, because you're going to fucking whine and complain that I'm vote shaming you. In which case, yes, I am. I am going to shame you. I'm going to shame you like I'm Simon Cowell on American Idol. But at least if you're not going to vote for,
it's powerful for motivation.
if you're not going to vote for Joe Biden against Trump, at least you should have the audacity to explain why. Because I was arguing, this was a while back, and I made this point, and I was arguing with somebody who was leftist. She could not bring herself to voting for Joe Biden. Now, she was pretty set forth on voting third party, but that's because she lived in California. And she knows that despite her vote for a third party, it will not change the fact that California's 55 electoral votes are going to go to Joe Biden. So she is arguing from a sense of privilege and luxury to do that. Now, in some other places, I've heard people argue like, well, I'm from Georgia. I know it's going to go red. So what's the point for me? I'm like, I get that. I understand how the Electoral College works. But that's why I'm stressing this. Because like, if you live, I'm still going to call Ohio a swing state right now. We'll see what happens. But if you live at least within the Midwest, you don't have that luxury or privilege. You have to like you bite the bullet hard, and you're going to have to make a hard choice. It's either going to be Trump or Biden. Don't give me this third-party bullshit. Don't, because it's always decided in those swing states.
Here's where I'm going to go with it, and I think it's a decent way to look at it, right? Okay. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. Now, I think Steve Jobs is an absolute asshole. Okay. I think was an absolute asshole.
Well, he's dead, so.
But here's my thought with it, right?
Okay.
Trump is the reality that we're living with, much like Steve Jobs' cancer. Now, you can either bite the bullet and get chemotherapy, which isn't fun.
No.
Or you can go on a vegan diet and pretend that it's going to work.
Yeah, take the holistic alternative approach.
Oh, guess what? And then when you realize that you screwed up, you're dead. It's a very simple analogy, and you have to do things you don't like. It's a grim
the political reality we live in. Like,
yeah.
Enough of this idealistic bullshit. Like, I guess I'm saying. I'm going to say, this is going to sound controversial, despite my misgivings about neoliberal policies. A neoliberal president like Biden is still better than a neo-fascist like Trump.
Ta-da!
You're not going to tell me that, if you're going to say, well, I can't tell the difference. I see one abstain. I'm going to assume you haven't been paying attention. And you've been living in a bubble.
There's a concept, and I think that people really aren't looking at a Rawlsian justice approach. And if you don't know who John Rawls is, you really need to read up on your justice, right? Especially if you're going to proclaim yourself as a leftist. And the idea is that we currently have a neo-fascist president that's a lot of people are operating underneath the lines of thought of a utilitarian approach, right? Mm-hmm. Essentially, you're looking at, the economy is better, the GDP went up, that's great, right? Because the sum is higher, right? It doesn't matter what people on the bottom have had to endure.
No.
Right? Versus, maybe the sum will be a little bit lower, but there's less of a differential on the bottom. It's squeezed here, right?
Yeah.
That is a much better approach because we don't want people to fall out through the bottom, right? Like, to me, the justification of, let's say, you can have a bunch of people being millionaires, right? But 10% of the population is literally slaves.
Prison system. Yeah.
You can have a population filled with people having hundreds of thousands of dollars, and no one's a slave.
Yeah. Go on.
With the veil of ignorance, you cannot choose what you have, right? Like, you can't pick your parents. You can't choose what you're born into. You can only try to play with the hand that you're dealt. And that is one of the biggest things that we have to go for and argue with in this situation. And unfortunately, people they're not seeing that concept.
I guess the devil's advocate, I guess I would argue, is like the accelerationist approach, where it's like, it's not going to be any different because like Joe Biden's presidency is like this idea of return to normalcy. Well, like, what normalcy? The conditions and environment that gave us Trump to begin with. I've already accepted that, the vast majority of the American people want to treat the symptom and not cure the disease. I get that. I'm disappointed that Bernie lost, but we still have a ways to go. But don't forget the progress that we've made so far. This is not the end of it. And I would argue that it is far easier to push leftist policies under a Democrat president than it is under a second-term Trump Republican presidency. Look at it from that context. It is far easier to push someone like Biden as opposed to Trump, who is vehemently opposed to anything any leftist advocates.
Well, I think you're going to need to look at the things that have happened in different parts of the country with the protest. And let's pull that back from maybe an anarchist or a leftist approach.
Okay.
Is that direct action can make change. Yeah, that's true.
No, it does, yeah.
But You need sympathetic people in power to be able to make those changes.
Correct. You do.
Otherwise, it falls on deaf ears. And you can have the exact opposite response that you want. And you could say, yes, that leads to radicalization of, the masses that are, it's bad enough. So that accelerationist argument will go through there. But that's, that really hasn't happened now, has it?
Well, I will say I will give Joe Biden some credit because, like, I'm trying to remember what interview it was, but a reporter asked him, like, what are your feelings on these Confederate statues being removed? And I guess the reporter tried to structure it in a way like, oh, this must be a tough question. But Joe Biden was like, I know it's because of what's happening right now. He's basically like, why are they here? Put them down. Put them in a museum. Like, they don't need to fucking be here.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that with Trump. You're at least going to get sympathy with Biden.
If we're also going to look at the pendulum swinging, there's a middle point before it goes to the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joe Biden has, I think, admitted, like, let's just say if Joe Biden is president, I think he's going to be a one-term president. He's going to be a facilitator.
Yeah.
He's going to be that middle way point, an opportunity to push further left. He's not running for 2 terms.
If you're also going to follow Lenin, we know that reforms and things going to the left are going to increase the population's drive to the left. Right. So even if you're a tanky, regardless of what ideology that you're going with, you need to do that. That's just me. The logic is there, right? And dude, you got to take the medicine even if it's bitter.
So like these left-wing Facebook groups that I join, like, they're very innocuous to the fact that, like, they're tankies, because, like, they'll encapsulate you with, like, oh yeah, this, like, left-wing meme, like, haha, I like that. A few days later, I scrolled on this, like, a praise of Stalin. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Cannibal Island. Okay? Cannibal Island.
I mean, I want to join, like, I like a lot of the left-wing groups that I'm a part of, but, like, when I find out, like, it's tanky sympathizers, I'm like, come on, guys. Come on.
Tankies in the U.S. are not going to be able to do anything, and most people don't want to have that sort of thing. And honestly, try, like, I'll go with Buchanan, and I will, or Bakunin, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I will go that the red bureaucracy, it can be much, much worse than the capitalist entities. Now, I think that capitalism is decaying, and it is prone to failure and movement towards fascism. But I would rather there be a shift, right? And the only way to do that is trying to get the mass amount of people together. And if you truthfully believe in democracy, that means making compromises and pushing as many people as you can into that, and displacing the current blatantly non-democratic. And I don't mean like the party. I mean just in general.
Right. No, I get you.
Are anti-democratic. And the only thing that we know in history that has prevented famine is democracy. Okay? The only thing that has prevented famine and atrocities is democracy.
Well, famines are man-made occurrences.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's capitalism or if it's socialism. They both have fucking happened.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you can go from the capitalist perspective, the Irish potato famine, to
the Bengal famine,
the Holodomor, to the Great Leap Forward on the communist side. It's just, And
if you're
when
going
there's a lack of accountability, there seems to be problems.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what economic system that you're using, accountability is the problem.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I will continue fighting for the ideals, but we have to understand where we're at, and it takes time.
No, I agree.
And if you want to tell me about how you're a Maoist and the Vanguard party's there, tell me about how much the Chinese natives know about Tiananmen Square.
Don't. Have you? Okay, so have you? I don't want to get into this right now, but like, have you watched Vosh's debate with guy's name is Maupin?
No.
You should really give it a look because Maupin is a Tankie, and he brings up this China problem, and his explanations for it is rather cringe. I would suggest anybody watch the Vaush Maupin debate, because it's basically Vaush debating a Tankie, and the stuff they talk about are the things that you have brought up, and it's enlightening, and it's why I'm like, it's why I'm probably never gonna see myself being a simp for Tankie rhetoric. Never, ever.
Tankies simp hard, dude. They simp hard. Oh, imperialist propaganda, dude. Dude, talk to Taiwan, okay? Talk to anyone from Taiwan. And sure, yes, they have been influenced by the United States, but you talk to anybody else, and they're not going to tell you the same thing. I mean, you'll have Vietnamese talk vehemently against China, like they're
yeah.
You cannot. It's now. Also, don't get me wrong, right? A lot of Eastern Bloc countries want to go back to the Soviet style economy. I don't blame them. I mean, they're just reaching to that.
Well, they went to the extreme because, like, if you look at the fall of the Soviet Union, what happened in Russia was all these Soviet institutions were just privatized to the oligarchs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
not much changed. Instead of one single state apparatus, you have individual monopolies, regional monopolies of certain industries.
And my biggest argument against capitalism in general is the unaccountable accumulation of power and the difficulty in making those people accountable again or removing those power structures.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in different ideologies, right? And by no means am I a centrist that's going to promote the horseshoe theory. No, that's trash.
I hate that. Fucking, yeah.
But,
Jesus. Speaking of cringe.
I don't want a Robespierre. I mean, that should be easy enough for people to understand.
Mm. So...
Or Napoleon Bonaparte to make it, quite simply. Because, I mean, like, look who occupied the vacuum of power.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you're going to want to look at. And if you truthfully want to create a massive vacuum in power and conflict within that's what will happen. That's what will happen.
Yeah. So speaking of Tankies and stuff, you wanted to talk about fascism, right?
I did. I just feel like a rant, and
that's okay.
It's easy enough. I mean, and don't get me wrong, right? Like, there's great things that the Soviet Union did. There's like they turned a backwater country into a freaking superpower, and like their system, like in Cuba, that was transposed there. Given there's some Cuban variations, it enables it to have the same outcomes in healthcare as the United States,
despite an embargo.
Yeah. Like,
and also let's not forget that Cuban doctors are exported right now to fight COVID.
Yeah, and the United States is just freaking falling on its face. There are some lessons to be learned, right? And they spend an 11th to get of the cost that the United States does in order to get the same results.
Right.
And I mean, like, there's a reason why Nelson Mandela invited Fidel Castro, and he didn't invite anyone, any presidential power in the United States.
Well, that history, that's important because, like, speaking of African history, Cuba was also involved in anti-imperialist policy. You can look specifically with the Angola Civil War that Cuba backed.
Or you can look at, like, Che Guevara in with the Congolese. Mm-hmm. You can look at right, and I mean, you can also look at the fact that you're consistently having, like, how many assassination attempts did frickin' Fidel Castro have to survive?
Yeah.
I mean, the if you look back at the history and people, oh man, Cuba, Cuba's a terrible place. You wouldn't have, if it was so great, you wouldn't have people running away. Okay, how many people run away from the United States?
I'm gonna say that despite I don't want to downplay any flaws of the Castro regime because there are, but like,
oh yeah. No,
I guess what I'm opposed to is this like sort of be all ends all like boogeyman approach. Like everything to do with Cuba under Castro was terrible.
Well, let's also look at this because I mean I think this truthfully is imperialist propaganda. Is what was Cuba like beforehand?
No, yeah, you had Batista, you had the mafia ruling Cuba. It was a playground.
Yeah. Okay. Oh man, it was this capitalist utopia. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, actually, because I'm working on this, I'm getting the ideas for this video about Indonesian intervention, and Cuba is going to be brought up because because if you look at history, I know we talked about this. I don't remember what episode, but I remember we talked about this, like the history of like attempts of leftist policies to be made electorally. And, if they do achieve that, great. But, what happens is the United States, institutes a CIA coup in your country and then you lose everything. So this is what propagated a lot of people to abandon electoral policy and just argue for just armed revolution. And that's basically what Castro did. So they take over, and of course, what happens? The United States tries to intervene with the Bay of Pigs, but of course that fails, and it's a stain on American interventionist policy.
I mean, there are so many stains on American intervention.
Right? Yeah, no.
That's the crazy thing to me is when you get somebody citing the Black Book of Communism. 100 million people died.
I think we've already discussed that these people don't want to acknowledge the deaths under capitalism.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is unfortunate because those people believe that there's some sort of objective arbiter of justice and truth. That's not the case. Just simply not the case. Now, originally we wanted to talk about some other things, but it became a anti-tanky rant.
No, I know, it's fine. I mean, how much time do you have left? Because I can probably...
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Shit. I wanted to... All right, I'll leave it up to you.
We can do how long is the Steven Crowder video?
I was just looking right now. I'm trying to see. Much longer than 10 minutes. So we can do that another time. Do you want to talk about Chaz, or do you want to talk about Oliver Thorne's recent video?
Let's go with Oliver Thorne's video.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. And I want to go on with something that I immediately don't get me wrong. Thorne is great. Philosophytube is wonderful. Ideally he'd be like, hey guys, let's have a conversation. Yes. Oh my goodness.
I would love to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, it'd be great. And the dialogue going between Marx and Darwin. And the eventual lead to social Darwinism and Lamarckian evolution. There's no conversation in epigenetics, but what did you want to talk about with it? Because I can hold mine.
Well, no, because I felt like, because I know Ali, like me, was associated at a time in his past with the new atheist movement. And there was a problem, the critiques of atheists, that the crimes of the 20th century was because of atheism, all these deaths, all this social Darwinist theory. But what people tend to forget is Darwin never coined that phrase. That was by a guy named Herbert Spencer, who took Darwinian theory and applied it to the social situations that human beings were facing at the time. That's where social Darwinism was coined, this survival of the fittest. And he was trying to argue capitalism from a scientific standpoint, that if we let the free market take its course and let people compete, change will happen. But this is where I find the naivete in that perspective from conservatives and right-wing libertarians, is that, yes, change happens, but don't assume that it's always going to be change for the good.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing along with, so pulling back to that. So like Francis Galton and Darwin, you could say social Darwinism's kind of within that. You could, I really thought he did an excellent job in talking about how Malthus.
Thomas Malthus, yes, great, because that's a principle that's still held today.
Oh yeah,
like I think a lot of people hold that view without knowing its origins. You hear people like, we can't afford any of this. Or it goes from the conservative perspective, like we can't fund these social welfare programs, to eco-fascism on the other side, basically saying that humanity itself is the virus. There's excess population. We can't, sustain ourselves this way. Well, we can't sustain ourselves this way because of the economic system we live in, not because of excess population, mind you.
There's if billionaires are killing the planet, period. Mm-hmm. Billionaires are killing the planet. Now, given, I would also say that Americans and rich Western nations, let's say the global South is not the problem.
No.
Right. And we should do a lot more to be able to help out with that. Now, I will also say, just as a quick side note, please do Meatless Mondays. Right, stand with solidarity for the folks that are currently working in the meatpacking plants.
Yes, please eat soy. Be a soy boy. That's okay.
Yeah. Trust me, you're not going to shrivel up. It will be fine.
Well, Malthusian theory is being applied right now with COVID. You see the lieutenant governor of Texas basically saying grandma and grandpa need to die for a strong economy.
Oh, yeah, no, because it will also decrease the amount of stress on pension funds, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, because what is happening right now with the Bolsonaro regime was that something was leaked. I guess the finance minister was like, with all these old people dying, that's going to be a definite reduction in our government pension costs we're going to have to give to people. So, look at the bright side on that.
Yeah. I have said that before facetiously, and people rallied behind it, and I'm like, oh dear God.
No, right, yeah.
Oh dear God.
That is insane.
What I will say though is, so Oliver Thorne does go into great detail about the Whig Party.
Yes.
Which I think is fantastic, and about how they were kind of proto-social Darwinists.
They were the neoliberals of the day. Like, yes. He frames it in a sense like they were against slavery. They were for the human rights of all, but they were also free market advocates, and they were pretty keen to make sure that there was at least government intervention as they could possibly propagate in the market.
Now we have enough evidence to show that by multiple Nobel laureates, that simply is not true. And if we look at Piketty, capital tends to centralize. Within our system, it will centralize, and at which point, I will go back to you're violating the Rawlsian justice principle. That's pretty evidently clear within the United States, as well as China. I'll also say, if we're looking at like the Marxian side, I will say that while Darwin stepped away with a victory for a long time, the current research is suggesting that Lamarck is having a little bit of a vengeance with epigenetics. And the reason that I want to bring that up is because his video specifically didn't talk about it.
He talked about eugenics in a sense of like how negatively.
Not eugenics, epigenetics. Oh,
epigenetics. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. So he did talk about eugenics, yes. But I want to talk about epigenetics.
Okay. This is basically Okay, forgive me if I'm wrong, but is this basically like, I want a baby with blue eyes?
No.
No, okay.
So like eugenics would basically be, I'm going to use whatever means necessary, Mendelian genetics, the simple construct to, the eugenics aspect to be able to generate desired traits, right? Or selective.
All right, so what is epigenetics?
Epigenetics is basically the idea that events during your lifetime will cause what was previously considered to be junk DNA to turn on different codons, right? Now we understand that and it's very Lamarckian, right? Lamarckian evolution is basically the idea that if an adaptation happens during a organism's lifetime, they will pass it on to their children. We assume that wasn't true. Mutation was it?
Yeah, that was Malthusian's theory. It wasn't. Yeah,
that was the Mendelian theory.
Yeah,
right?
Whatever. Yeah.
So you're only going to have phenotypic expression. Phenotypic expression is whatever your genetic dominance or codominance presents itself. That's what you're going to see, but the genetic code underneath that is different.
Right.
Very simple portion of it. But epigenetics is events in your life will change your DNA that is expressed, and consequently will change what is heritable in your children. So let's look at it this way. Famine, right? The Dutch famine, specifically, massive study in this, one of the most powerful pieces of evidence arguing with this.
Okay.
That the people that had experienced famine, their descendants would be predisposed to heart disease, insulin sensitivity would be decreased, promoting diabetes, other comorbidities would be associated with this, where they would generally see a shorter life. We can see this repeated again with Civil War prisoners of war with the record in the United States. I would argue that we also see this with enslaved populations. I would also argue that you can see this in different aspects, and they also do this within astronauts, right? Where you can see that if someone is exposed to zero-G conditions or the vacuum of space, it will permanently change their DNA, and there will be a prioritization of spreading that gene down to their descendants. So the Lamarckian idea, while not perfect, has some merit within that. And the epigenetic theory, along with the things that we know about famine survivors or other populations, I would say increases our push for Rawlsian justice, right? So like if we say, oh, it's okay if 10% of the world is treated like shit, as long as 90% is being treated well, that 10% will have a lasting effect throughout generations that are simply, to me, not ethically viable. Because then you're altering the DNA in a negative fashion of those descendants. And conversely, we can look at positive effects with it and societal elements like the Flynn effect.
Right.
With the Flynn effect, it's basically the ultimate rebuttal to the Sam Harris, the new atheist idea of, or the Charles Murray's idea of the bell curve.
Yeah.
Right. Like, give these people an opportunity and you will see continued growth within that. Will there be genetic variation? Yeah, there will. But the population will experience something that is much, much better, I think, overall. And that would be my argument against what we are currently seeing.
One thing like under this current system, I mean, obviously you have people on the lower tier. Obviously they're all right, sorry about that. Shit, what was I gonna say? Sorry.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good.
What was I gonna say? I guess the current system that we live in, like, in a way where aren't we kind of exhibiting sort of that theory with the people on the lowest tier
They are.
Yeah.
In America, we are definitely seeing that. Just within America, not even talking about the subjugation of the people in the global south.
Right. Yeah. No, because that's what I was referring to. If you look at, just the way that the neoliberal capitalist system functions. I guess in a way, this problem has always persisted within and under the capitalist system, because there's always the people who own stuff and the people who labor. So you have the people who labor versus the people who actually own the property. That separation is much more exemplified over the years, the more pervasive the system exists. Do you get me? I do.
It's people move on, and they'll say, "Oh, but the market."
Because wealth is inherited in many ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even if it is not specifically your wealth, you can look at it within school systems. You can look at it within environmental pollutions. You can look at it within redlining, social mobility, other aspects of institutions that you're able to take part in simply because of the position in society that you occupy.
Right. I guess you could explain, I guess in many ways you can explain the inequality through a Darwinian theory, and the fact that some people have benefited from a system over the years while others have not.
I wouldn't even say within it. I don't think that's Darwinian.
No. Okay. Am I being too liberal with the term?
So I don't think it's Darwinian. I think what we can see is an element. I would argue that it's more. You could argue that like the social conditions are Lamarckian, but I would say like Piketty is by far a better example. He is by far a better example of it, of what exactly is going on, and ideally what could change. But
okay. I got you.
That's all the time that I have. What
Yeah.
about?
That's good for me.